Max Rockatansky, the Road Warrior, the Raggedy Man, Crazy Maximus. No matter what you call him, Mad Max is one of Australia's biggest pop culture icons, and this is thanks entirely to Mad Max 2.
Why are you boring me? I'm right!
When people think Mad Max, they think the V8 Interceptor, they think weird gangs and a crumbling world. They think of everything you see in Mad Max 2. The first one isn't even post-apocalyptic, and the third, well, I don't really have much to say about that movie. But hey, before you get your pitchforks out, the franchise has moved out of its own shadow with the release of Mad Max Fury Road, a surprise box office smash, or home run, or slam dunk, or any other number of terms that ironically describe very active movements, considering that the entire idea of cinema is to park your ass in a chair and look at a glowing wall for 2 hours. But anyway, Fury Road was a huge success, and it reaffirmed that Mad Max is still rad for another generation of viewers, myself included. So around the time of 2015, it was a great time to be a Mad Max fan, because you had the movie, and you had something else that was kind of Maxy related around that time. Oh yeah, it was the game. Anyone remember this thing? Hello everybody, Bonkers Brandos here today to do something a little bit different. Now I just want to preface this by saying that this is not a retrospective on the Mad Max game, it's a review with retrospective elements. I originally wrote this video as a retrospective, and halfway through I realized I don't have enough to say about this game to talk about it for like an hour straight. So we're just doing an old-fashioned review, and if you kind of like this new formula where I'm mixing in elements from my other videos into just a boring old review, then let me know and I'll make more of these. But continuing on with Mad Max, this game really did get the short end of the straw. It was buried under the mountains of open world action games that were being released around that time, and it really didn't help that this game released on the same day as Metal Gear Solid 5. Like, what were you thinking? Apart from that, the game didn't really advertise itself that well. Like, it came out around the same time as Fury Road, many elements like War Boys and Gas Town were in the game, and yet it was a completely disconnected experience from the films. Mixing these elements together just created a kind of confusing mess that scared a lot of the general audiences off. But with the release of Furiosa, I decided it was time to jump back into this game and see if it deserved the fate that it got.
Those born into this hell have no remembrance of anything else. Those who survived, those are the truly broken. For they know what was before.
The premise of Mad Max is simple. Max has gone completely insane and is trying to get to a fictional place called the Plains of Silence, an area of the wasteland where Max will finally find peace. By the time we meet him in the game, he's almost ready to make the journey and is just searching for fuel when he's ambushed by one of Immortan Joe's sons named Scrotus. Scrotus and his escort steals all of Max's stuff, but not being happy with this, he chases down the convoy and gets into a fight with Scrotus, with him unfortunately only succeeding in giving him a chainsaw lobotomy before being thrown off the vehicle again. Max then sets about rebuilding, eventually coming into contact with Chumbucket, a mechanic who believes Max is a saint sent by his god to help him build what he calls the Magnum Opus, a superpowered car made to act as a vessel for the Angel of Combustion. Essentially, Chumbucket wants to build a car that is unmatched in the wasteland, in both speed and fury, an idea that Max can get behind.
Hell yeah! Bulletproof and torture tested, statically upgraded with Chumbucket overdrive. Coils, and springs, and shocks, and links too.
It's gotta be 8 cylinders, nothing less.
And that's the big plot here. Much of Mad Max is about upgrading the Magnum Opus, with the main prize being the Big Chief, one of the last V8 engines rocking around in the wasteland. The only problem is that the only way to get to it is win in the Gastown races, and the road to even get there is paved with danger. And here I can just jump right into gameplay, because if there's one thing the game does really well, it's mix open world gameplay with the story in a way that I haven't really seen get done since something like Mafia 2. Pretty much you always have a mission while you're doing the story. You might be in the open world, but the story doesn't just stop because you're not doing a mission. Chumbucket, who rides in the back of the Opus, will often talk to Max about the region he's in, the landmarks he passes, or even factions we're going to talk to. There's always something happening in the wasteland, and it feels really realistic. Max as a character is always on the move, so it feels right that you've always got somewhere to go, while the side missions are just obstacles in your way. But what are these side missions? Well, this is where things get a little less unique, because this is a 2015 game that most of you don't remember, so that should already be a bit of a tip-off on how innovative some of this stuff is. For an overview, each region of the wasteland is run by someone. This could be Jeet, Gutgash, Pink Eye, or Deep Fryer, and ever since Scrotus rolled into the area, they've been playing underdogs, with their regions becoming extremely dangerous. To build alliances and to unlock different car parts through the game, Max needs to make his way around these regions and scrub out Scrotus's presence. This is done by doing a few side missions where you shut down warboy camps, topple scarecrows, disarm minefields, kill snipers, and destroy convoys. And as far as the side missions go, these are pretty alright. Warboy camps have you going to destroy an oil pump, and while doing that, you have to fight a few dozen warboys. You can find scarecrows scattered throughout the world, which are easy enough to topple with the right tools. Killing snipers only requires a rocket, and convoys are just some good old demolition derby fun. But it's not all perfect. Some of these missions aren't great, like the Warboy camp missions where you have to find up to 12 fuel transfer tanks and destroy them. It's such a slog, and sometimes the devs just put these tanks in inaccessible spots, or even spots that are the same color as the tanks, just making it feel like the worst Easter egg hunt ever. The other side mission that I'm not a fan of is the minefield mission. Using Dinky D, that's a dog we meet at the start of the game by the way, he can sniff out mines that we just need to walk up to and disarm. And I think that this activity would be better if you didn't have to take out Chumbucket's buggy in order to use Dinky D. This is mostly because it's just a huge hassle. To get the buggy, you need to head to a stronghold, change your vehicle, and then head out to the minefield, which doesn't really sound that bad, and that's because it wouldn't be if the incentive to do these missions was better. In the game, scrap you find is everything. It's the way you upgrade the Opus, and considering that I spent an extra 15 hours after the campaign still scavenging for scrap, what I really would have liked is if one of the most time-consuming missions in the game actually gave you some of that. But nope, disarming mines only gives you ammo for the rocket launcher, and considering that I had the strongholds upgraded to automatically refill all ammo by this point in my playthrough, this mission felt like a huge waste of time. And something I haven't mentioned yet is that the way you find these side missions is by doing a Ubisoft game thing. You know, in Far Cry it's towers, in Assassin's Creed it's synchronization points, and in Watch Dogs it's C2OS access points. Well, in Mad Max it's air balloons that you can take up and use your binoculars to scope out the region. It's a really weird inclusion considering that people weren't loving the get to a high point and find side missions model by 2015, but honestly that's just what Mad Max is. It's a game that takes stuff that's worked in other games and uses it for itself, and sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's a bad thing. On the good side of things though, this can be seen clearly with the combat, with it being nearly a one-for-one remodel of the Batman Arkham brawling system. And just to be clear, I'm not complaining here. The combat in the Arkham games is one of the most fun systems I think I've ever played, and in Mad Max, they tweak it to wholly fit Max as a character. See, unlike Batman, Max isn't a superhero. He isn't precise, and he definitely isn't concerned with not killing his enemies. This can be felt in the gameplay where Max feels way more weighty than Batman ever did, and because of that, they really get across the character through the combat. Max's main priority is not finesse, it's punching and kicking the other guy until he stops moving. So the player is encouraged to embrace that feral animal playstyle, especially with mechanics like the Fury system. After inflicting enough damage, Max enters a kind of insane flow state where his brutality is ramped up. The damage we deal out is a little higher, and enemies even become afraid of you when you do finishing moves on other enemies. Apart from that, there are some other options in combat other than punching. Max can use knives to insta-kill stunned enemies, and of course we have a shotgun at our side that can also insta-kill. The only real problem with the entire system, and one that plagued the Arkham games, is that it is way too easy. If you're switched on, you can easily destroy dozens of enemies in a single fight without taking any damage, and that's not even a mention when you begin upgrading Max's fighting abilities. Like, this isn't a brag to show you guys what a pro gamer I am, but I don't think I ever lost a single hand-to-hand fight in this game. Sure, I was blown up, struck by lightning, or run over, but I never lost a hand-to-hand fight in my entire run. The devs just made Max such an animal that he's nearly too easy to play as. The Arkham games on the other side of the fence fixed this problem by including a new game plus, which removed attack markers, sped up enemy animations, and increased their damage, but Max lacks this feature. You only get one playthrough, one difficulty, and boom, that's the game. But hey, if brawling's not your thing, then maybe driving will be, because believe it or not, the Mad Max video game actually includes a lot of driving. So obviously you spend most of the game just sitting inside the magnum opus, and with your main goal being to build up the car, you spend a lot of time speeding around the wasteland looking for cars to blow up and scavenging opportunities. And all up, it feels pretty good, but also pretty grindy at the same time. The scrap you find lying around is usually a pretty low amount, and the upgrades for the opus cost quite a lot. So if you want to fully upgrade the car, it's honestly going to take you about like 35 hours or more. And yes, I'm speaking from experience, I'm so sick of this game. I mean, just putting the main story aside, the premise is all about building this car, right? So when you've finished the main story and you've still got a half complete opus, what are you going to do? And don't say stop playing, because that's not an option. Really, it is just super addictive to see your car go from nothing but a frame with a body on it to an absolute war machine. With the upgrades, you can get a rocket launcher, a harpoon, a sniper, which I don't think I ever actually used, a faster engine, a better ram guard, wheels that shred enemy tires, flamethrowers that will throw off anyone coming up beside you. The list just goes on. Also, if you want to change the color of your car, you can go around to different boss strongholds and defeat Scrotus's lieutenants, which are called top dogs and are also voiced by Saxton Hale.
You don't come here! Not here! This is my place! You're just a rickety man.
What do you got, though?
Don't worry, son. Stick with me. Just so I can pleasure myself with your twitching corpse.
You can also take on enemy convoys to get hood ornaments that buffs your car in things like speed, damage, or armor. And it feels great to gain all this utility. You get to go from having to pull some goofy maneuvers in order to win battles to having enemies run away from you after you pulverize their body. It's super satisfying, and yet there's one glaring problem. By the time the opus is complete, all the convoys will most likely have been destroyed. Personally, I did it to harvest the huge amounts of scrap you could get from destroying them, but in the process I got rid of the only thing I could really test my car against. Instead, now I just have this insanely tricked out ride with at best only 3 cars to fight at a time. Kinda sucks that the devs either didn't have the time or the foresight to kinda fix this problem, because when I started the game I was told to create the biggest, baddest car in the wasteland, and once I did, no one wants to fight me, which I guess makes sense. This is pretty much an arsenal on wheels, but come on! Even when the car wasn't fully upgraded, I felt like there weren't enough cars in a convoy to pose much of a threat. What I really wish was that there was some sort of respawning convoy that has something like 20 cars in it. They don't even have to drop scrap. I just want to blow some shit up, please! So yeah, in overview, the gameplay is extremely successful in its goals of being grindy, addictive, and fun, but it seems like the devs didn't actually put much thought into what the player would be able to do with their accumulated power once all was said and done. But to be honest, I don't really play games for the gameplay, I play them for the story, which in Mad Max's case is pretty alright. Now to get into the story, I gotta say I'm a little bit conflicted about it, because when you actually get into it, it's a really well directed, well voice acted action movie. But the biggest problem is what comes in between it. Now just to give you a bearing of how the story flows, you start the game in a dried out seabed, and after doing some jobs to work on the magnum opus, Chumbucket's hideout is blown up by one of Scrotus's henchmen. So we head over to a stronghold run by a guy named Jeet, and we do some jobs for him before moving on to another stronghold run by a guy named Gut Gash and doing some jobs for him. And during this part, you really do feel the anticipation. The whole goal of this area is to go through the Jaw, which is a massive gate that's been constructed to keep people traveling through the seabed out of Scrotus's territory. So we go about scouting the thing out, getting the equipment we need, and once we clear the thing, we're introduced to more strongholds that need our help in return for advancing the story. And look, I can hold on to a game for a while. If you give me a monotonous objective, I'll complete it because I want to see where where it all goes. But in Mad Max, every objective is a monotonous objective. To give you the absolute best example of this in the game, I present the Gastown races. These races are how we'll win the V8 engine for our car, but the game doesn't make it easy at all to get into the races. First we talk to the Outcrier, the guy who runs the races, and he says there's no more spots available. So to earn our place, we go to an old airport and find some Christmas lights for him. This secures our spot in the races. Unfortunately, we also need a Lancer, someone to ride on the back of the car and attack other competitors, and the only one available is a drug addict named Tenderloin, who hangs out with a rival race hoster named Crowdazzle. So heading there, we talk to Tenderloin, who says that if we clear her debt with Crowdazzle, she'll lance for us. So talking to Crowdazzle, he says he'll clear Tenderloin's debt if we partake in one of his races, except he won't let us race before we upgrade the Magnum Opus, something we can only do by roaming around in the open world and getting scrap. And only once we do all of this can we actually join the Gastown races. Like, can you see how this can get a little annoying?
I need your help.
I'll do it. On one condition.
I need to join the races now.
In return, for a favor.
I need a fighter.
Square my debt with Crowdazzle, and I swear I'll get sober and murder up with you.
Tenderloin's dead.
You race for Crow. Here. Now.
Fine.
Not so fast, Buck. You ain't racing that funky junk here.
I need to join the races now.
It feels like most of the game is a Grand Theft Auto Online heist, and you're constantly just doing setup missions. It just doesn't really feel narratively satisfying to actually work your way through the game. Also, after the Gastown Races mission, the next mission is where you begin to enter the finale, and the game flat out tells you that you need to build relationships with the surrounding strongholds to proceed, which is kind of ironic considering that you don't even need the help of most of them at the end. It just feels really cheap, like they're trying to bloat an already packed game. Anyway, I'm about to move into spoiler territory, so if you don't want to hear any of this, I've included timestamps in the video, so yeah, time to scram, alright? So to get into spoilers, there's not a whole lot to spoil, since this game's plot is Max going, give me what I want, and the other character going, yeah, okay, go do this for me. But there are some loose story threads that form through the game that eventually culminate in the climax. One of these threads is Hope's storyline. Earlier in the game when we meet Gut Gash, we also meet Hope. She's one of Immortan Joe's wives who was given to Scrotus's right hand, Stank Gum, for not being able to produce an heir. Also, yes, Immortan Joe from Fury Road does exist in this world, but it's also important to know that this game is 100% not canon to any of the movies. But through the game, Hope gives us some useful information on where to find good loot, some new cars, and she mostly does this in the hopes that Max will eventually return the favor. But Max doesn't care about anyone or anything that's not useful to him and only wants the Big Chief V8. However, once we win the Gastown races, it turns out that Scrotus actually survived his chainsaw lobotomy. And after a fight that Max loses, Hope saves his life and also helps him get the Big Chief. In return, she begs Max to go into Buzzard territory and find her missing daughter named Glory, a request that Max pretty much says fuck off in response to.
I never promised you nothing.
But Max's humanity gets the best of him and he decides to go find Glory, an action that Chumbucket is not happy with. While in the airport, Chumbucket takes the Magnum Opus, abandoning us. Luckily, we find another way out and bring Glory back to her mother. The pair then offer Max the opportunity to be a part of the family again. But being consumed with rage at Chumbucket's betrayal, he turns down their offer and speeds back to Chumbucket's old hideout, where we find that he was followed by Stank Gum and interrogated. After fighting Stank Gum, we learn that Scrotus now knows about Hope and Glory, and given that Scrotus wants revenge for Max's botched brain surgery, it's not hard to figure out what his next move is. So speeding back to the place we left the pair, we find Scrotus has come and gone. Hope and Glory are dead, and it's all Max's fault. Well, kind of. It depends how you look at it. Max obviously blames himself though. But now Max is properly mad, in both the angry way and the crazy way, since we head off to Scrotus's convoy and hit it with everything we've got. got. And I really like this fight just because of the sheer number of cars you go up against. The soundtrack is pumping, and with all the sudden story beats that have hit so hard, so fast, the chase is super emotionally charged. I mean, Max hallucinates both hope and glory, telling him to kill Scrotus during the chase, and Max even starts saying wedding vows during some parts. Like, this connection he had with Hope was the closest he's been with anyone in a long time.
Do it. The only thing you know how. Kill him.
Until death.
But anyways, we eventually end up defeating Scrotus's convoy, and the chase comes to an end on a cliffside. Max decides to use the magnum opus as a battering ram to push Scrotus's vehicle over, much to the horror of Chumbucket, who refuses to get off the car. But being the uncaring asshole he is, Max sends both the opus and Chumbucket barreling towards the land mover. Unfortunately, Scrotus has a backup plan, and just before the land mover topples over the cliff, he emerges from the cargo bay in a reassembled V8 Interceptor, and the final boss fight begins. We end up beating Scrotus by throwing some exploding spears at him, and after one final struggle, we finish the surgical procedure that we started at the beginning of the game. Max then reclaims his Interceptor and zooms back off into the wasteland, resuming his mission of outrunning his demons. And look, I know this is just meant to be a review, but let me put on the long-form analysis retrospective hat real quick and just talk about it, because I really like this ending. And why is that? Well, it's because Max doesn't really have a character arc at all. In fact, the game does a kind of clever inverse character arc where Max begins making progress towards his better self, but self-sabotages at the last second. At the start of the game, we meet Max, a brooding loner who's only out for himself. He gets his vehicle stolen, and for the first time since the fall, he actually needs people. And this need builds connection. Max even falls in love with Hope, and in this dream cutscene we see after the Gastown races, Max accepts his desire to have someone in his life. The Interceptor in that scene only gets wrecked when it plows into Max and Hope's space, because it's a representation that what Max has in that moment is better than the comfort and security that the Interceptor has provided him with all these years. For this one moment, Max doesn't need the road, he doesn't need the car, and he doesn't need to keep running. But that hard-baked survival instinct keeps getting in the way. For the entire game, Max is just trying to build his car so he can get away from people, all while wrestling with his feelings about Hope. Honestly, if Chumbucket hadn't have left Max in buzzard territory and inflamed that revenge part of Max's brain, there might have been a chance that he would have accepted Hope and Glory's offer of family. But Max is too scared to leap from the road back into the real world and goes after his car, a move that costs him everything. That's why there's literally no character arc. At the start of the game, he's certain the wasteland will only bring him pain, and through the story, that belief is little by little disproved. But when he gets too close to someone and gets too scared, he pays the price. But remember, Max is crazy, hence the title Mad Max. He's not doing all this critical thinking and self-analysis. He doesn't see that he's self-sabotaging. So when he comes out of his shell and is once again hurt for it, he takes it as a confirmation that the only way to survive is to never stop moving, never build relationships, and never let yourself feel hope.
You know, hope is a mistake.
That's why I love this ending. We've played the game, we've won the battles, but this isn't a victory. Max has backslid all the way back to where he was in the opening of the game, and the final cutscene really brings it all together for me. Max zooms off in his Interceptor, leaving behind a snow globe Glory gave to him. He's pretending like none of this matters to him, like it's just another distraction from his goal of reaching the Plains of Silence. But we, the audience, know the truth. Max is running again, and Hope and Glory are just two more ghosts that are coming after him. The final shot is great because the music sounds almost uncertain of whether this was a triumph or a failure. And as the camera slowly loses track of the Interceptor, one thing to note is that the camera never stops moving. It's making a statement about Max while also asking the simple question of, will Max ever stop running? And that's mostly the story of Mad Max. Through the game, he and by extension you, the player, are so obsessed with getting your hands on the big chief that you never stop to wonder what you'll do once you get it. The entire story is one big character study about Max's main struggle. It's not really a continuation of his story, it's a highlight of his biggest demons, his inability to stop and process his pain. And that's why, for all the problems I'm about to talk about, I think the game is a fantastic look into Max's character. Because whether you know it or not, it's a deep dive into the way his mind works. And when you play the game and watch the movies, especially Fury Road, it acts as this just a fantastic companion piece. Okay, analysis hat off, I want to talk about the atmosphere, because this game has one of the most downright depressing ambiences I have ever experienced. The wasteland is just a dead expanse of nothingness, and driving around you can feel that decay. Everywhere you go, there's nothing left. Nothing looks like it even remotely works like it used to. Reading up on the game, I also found out that the devs actually made the sky more vibrant to contrast the dead, bland landscape, a move that I think does wonders for the ambience. I mean, there were so many times in the game where I just had to stop and admire the scenery, because while the wasteland is just a lot of flat nothing, it's a beautiful lot of flat nothing. I'll actually put it out there that this is probably one of the nicest looking games I think I have ever played, which is ironic considering I was just talking about how depressing this game was. But I think that sad, dead feeling the world gives off actually helps the lighter things feel more important. For example, strongholds. Like I mentioned earlier, through the game you travel to various strongholds, but they don't just exist in favor of the story. You can travel back to these places later in the game and actually upgrade them using project parts you find throughout the world. These projects can be something like a maggot farm that refills your health, a drip collector that refills your water, or even a cleanup crew that automatically grabs all scrap from cars you destroy out in the wasteland. And these projects don't just benefit you, they benefit the stronghold, allowing their inhabitants to thrive, and the more projects you build, the more the occupants build too. Eventually the ambience goes from something downright sinister and lonely like this to something more comforting and cheerful like this.
Things you've done for us, I don't know how to make it up to you.
That's right. You get to gas town sometime.
Like I said, it's those small bits of levity in this hardcore world that makes the experience feel truly special. And with those bits of levity, there's also small bits of darkness that go even grimmer than the normal game. Bits like your conversations with Griffer. This is a character that appears when Max does something notable in order to give him upgrades. And I think he was meant to be a hallucination, but I don't really know. What I do know is that he actually serves as a pretty big part of the narrative. Griffer shows up to debate Max on his never stop moving philosophy, and I guess what could be called mini therapy sessions. But in these moments, we can see just how truly broken Max has become.
You say you seek the plains of silence, but do you not wander them right now? The remains of your life, a perpetual flight, an escape from all that is human.
So yeah, the game has some fantastic ambience, but honestly, I think this is one of the first games I've actually had to take a break from. Like, the game is just so miserable that I think if you're planning to play it, you need to evaluate if you're in the right headspace to go ahead with it. Because this world is just so realistic. There's no fantastical elements, there's no cool power armor, there's just a dead world full of ghosts and the people who are haunted by them. Which all in all, I think is kind of exactly what a Mad Max game should feel like. So good job, I guess. But let's not get this twisted up. The game is not perfect, and aside from the complaints I've voiced earlier, I have one glaring problem with this entire experience, and that's that this game is 100% not set in Australia. Now, being Australian myself and spending quite a large portion of my life with the outback right outside my window, I always felt that something was really off about this game. It's hard to explain, but just looking at the rocks, the mountains, even the color of the dirt, it's clear that either someone didn't do their homework on Australia or it's not set in Australia. Now, my bullshit-o-meter was absolutely absolutely spiking through a lot of my playthroughs. So I did some research, and it turns out that back when this game was announced, Max actually had a Southern American accent, and the backlash was so bad that Avalanche Studios had to recast Max to be an actual Australian. And this Band-Aid fix actually has fooled a lot of people. Max and a few other characters in the game actually have either Australian or New Zealand accents, but as for the big characters that star in cutscenes, it's clear that Avalanche didn't want to spend all that cash recasting people, leaving us with about 3 Southern accented Americans more than I've ever run into here in Australia. And let me remind you, I don't live in a post-apocalyptic Australia where there's only like a couple of hundred people inhabiting an area.
What's the jewel?
It's a gate you gotta pass to reach Gastown.
I got gas.
So pitch me, little man, before I make a blood sport of your driver here.
A man of your word. Now, give a girl a moment to clear her head.
There's also things you can find in the world like American-style diners, buses with the driver's seat on the wrong side, road signs that look nothing like you'd see in the outback, and speaking of road signs, what about this one? Now ignore that sign that says Memory Lane, let's remember Max is a little crazy, but this other road sign says Gallop. And if you want to take that leap of faith with me that says that Max isn't hallucinating this sign as well, a lot of pieces start to fall into place. See, Gallop is a town in New Mexico in America. Given that you'd have to be at least somewhat close to New Mexico to see a sign for Gallop, I'm assuming that the game takes place around the Gulf of California / Arizona. Also know that bridge doesn't exist, that statue also doesn't exist, but still, Gallop is the only real-world location mentioned, and the area we're in the game looks very similar to the kind of desert you'd see surrounding Gallop in the surrounding states and whatnot. It looks way closer to that than anything you'd ever see here in Australia, which leads me to think that it's probably not set in Australia. I think that Avalanche fully intended to make a Mad Max game, but they wanted to make it more of a Western, which would be a cool idea if it weren't so damn insulting. Mad Max is like the only popular thing Australia has ever made, aside from like Crocodile Dundee, so it really sucks that it's just not more faithful to the series. Everything in this game works really, really well. It looks great, it's fun, and the story is interesting, but it's missing that one thing, that Australian feel to things. And I know that most of you watching are Americans, and it might not seem like such a big deal, but Mad Max is our thing, and driving around in a game about our thing and not seeing anything that remotely resembles our culture within it kinda sucks, and if I'm being honest, it does hurt the final score for me. In the end, Mad Max is a game that excels in a few things and majorly messes up also in a few things. It's a bit of a mixed bag for me, but I generally had a really good time playing it. And hey, when you think about a rarely talked about 2015 open world action game, what more can you really ask for other than a good experience that you're probably never gonna touch again? That's all really to say that Mad Max is pretty alright, and I'll give it a 7 out of 10.